Imagine waking up one morning to a question that rattles every certainty in your life. What if the man you believed to be your father wasn't really your father at all? Not in theory, not in rumor, but proven, DNA confirmed. And what if this secret had been kept from you, from the world, from everyone you've ever trusted? For Prince William, heir to one of the most scrutinized monarchies on earth, this shocking revelation didn't just challenge his personal identity. It threatened the very foundation of the monarchy itself. A palace built on centuries of tradition, on carefully curated images of lineage, duty, and legacy, suddenly seemed fragile, vulnerable, human. And in the center of it all stood William, a man whose life had been guided by protocols, public appearances, and expectations, but whose personal truth was about to shatter everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. We are about to step into a story that reads like a thriller, but it is very real. Allegedly commissioned by Princess Anne, a DNA test has revealed a paternity twist so explosive that it has shaken Buckingham Palace to its core. The implications ripple far beyond the gilded halls, beyond the press releases and public appearances. They touch every facet of the royal family, challenge centuries of succession, and force us all to reconsider what we thought we knew about identity, loyalty, and betrayal at the highest levels of power. But before we get there, we need to understand the man at the center of this storm. Prince William, raised under the bright lights of public adoration, expected to become the next king, groomed for a lifetime of duty, has always been more than a figurehead. To the world, he was steadfast, calm, the embodiment of stability in a family often portrayed as chaotic and unpredictable. But behind closed doors, William's life was far from simple. The pressures of public life, constant scrutiny, and the quiet weight of expectations were enormous. Now, layer onto that the revelation that he may not biologically be the son of King Charles, the very man whose legacy and crown he was expected to inherit, and the stakes become unimaginable. Consider, for a moment, the human side of this scenario. Imagine discovering that your identity, the very thing you believe to be immutable, is in question. The bedrock of family, the traditions you've lived your life to uphold, suddenly feels like shifting sand beneath your feet. Every photograph, every holiday, every public engagement, every private conversation, all of it carries a hidden context. And now imagine this revelation happening not in a quiet family home, but in a palace where every corner, every room, every corridor is steeped in centuries of history and expectation. That is the reality Prince William faces. You may be wondering, how could this have happened? How could a secret like this survive decades under the relentless eye of the media, the staff, and the royal household itself? The answer is as dramatic as the revelation itself. Allegedly, Princess Anne, known for her sharp mind, her meticulous attention to detail, and her fierce loyalty to family, commissioned a private investigation, a DNA test, to uncover the truth about William's lineage. Why? Was it curiosity, concern, or a calculated attempt to protect the family from an even greater scandal? We can only speculate, because in a palace, motives are often hidden behind layers of protocol, discretion, and, sometimes, deception. What makes this story so riveting is the intersection of personal and public stakes. On the one hand, this is a deeply intimate family matter, a question of parentage, identity, and trust. On the other hand, it has ramifications that extend to the monarchy itself. Succession laws, the public's perception of the royal family, the legitimacy of titles and roles, all could be called into question. The monarchy is an institution built not just on tradition, but on the assumption of lineage and continuity. The revelation that the presumptive heir is not biologically tied to the reigning king threatens that assumption at its core. And yet, amid all this chaos, William made a choice, one that shocked everyone who thought they understood him. He quietly began the process of resigning from royal duties. No grand announcement, no immediate media spectacle, just a private, deliberate withdrawal from the very institution that had defined him since birth. He was saying goodbye to Buckingham Palace, the palace that had raised him under a carefully constructed lie. He was stepping away from a life that, until now, had seemed predestined to carve out a reality that was truly his own. Pause for a moment and reflect on this. What would you do if everything you had been taught about your family, your life, and your role in the world was suddenly proven false? Would you stay silent, protect the status quo, and maintain appearances? Or would you step into the unknown, risk public scrutiny, and pursue the truth, no matter the consequences? Prince William chose the latter. But the path he has taken is fraught with challenges, secrets, and revelations that even the most seasoned palace insiders could not have anticipated. This story is not just about scandal. It's about identity, loyalty, and courage in the face of betrayal. It is about the fragile intersection of private truth and public image. Every royal engagement, every handshake, every smile for the cameras now carries an unspoken weight. And the world, which has long observed the monarchy with fascination, is now watching with bated breath. Every detail is scrutinized, every gesture dissected, every word interpreted through a lens of suspicion and curiosity. We're going to walk through this story step by step. We will explore the childhood and upbringing of William, the complex family dynamics at Buckingham Palace, the alleged secret mission by Princess, and the DNA evidence, and William's personal and public reactions. We will examine the implications for the monarchy, the reactions of key family members, the global media storm, and what this all means for the future of the crown. And along the way, we will ask questions that are difficult, unsettling, and deeply human. How do you reconcile love and loyalty with betrayal? Can institutions survive when the truths they are built upon are challenged? What does it mean to live a life defined by duty, only to learn that the foundation of that duty is a lie? But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The story is far from over. The DNA evidence, though shocking, is just the beginning. William's decision to step back from royal duties sets off a chain reaction that reaches into every corner of the palace and beyond. Advisors scramble. Family members take sides. The media senses a story that could redefine the monarchy, and William himself faces choices that could change the course of his life forever. So, as we begin this journey, I ask you to keep one thing in mind. Nothing is as it seems. The palace, the titles, the centuries of tradition, all of it is a stage, and the real drama is happening behind closed doors. What you are about to hear will challenge your understanding of family, power, and identity. And by the end, you may never look at Buckingham Palace or the monarchy the same way again. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it truly mean to grow up in a palace? To walk the same halls that have echoed with centuries of history, to be surrounded by golden chandeliers, marble floors, and portraits of ancestors whose lives seem larger than life? For Prince William, Buckingham Palace was both a playground and a cage, a world of privilege that came with rules he didn't fully understand until later, and expectations he could never escape. But did anyone ever stop to ask what it felt like to be a boy raised under the scrutiny of millions, only to one day discover that everything he had been taught about family might have been a lie? The palace is enormous, almost impossibly so. Over 700 rooms, 19 staterooms, countless corridors, private apartments. To most people, it is a monument to power, wealth, and tradition. To William, it was home. A home filled with echoes, of laughter, of footsteps, of whispered instructions, and of constant observation. From the earliest days, cameras and courtiers captured every smile, every stumble, every moment that might eventually be seen by the public. Nothing was truly private. Every birthday, every Christmas, every small gesture was performed with an awareness that the world was watching. And yet, despite the grandeur, there was a very human story unfolding within these walls. William's childhood was carefully curated, yes, but it was also shaped by pressures that few could imagine. Tutors arrived promptly, lessons were rigorous, and behavior was scrutinized. He was taught to uphold the dignity of the monarchy at all costs. Emotional restraint was expected. Vulnerability was a risk. Every boy wants to make mistakes, to fall and be comforted, to have the freedom to question. But what happens when questioning is a threat to the institution that surrounds you? As a child, William displayed a remarkable awareness of his environment. Even at a young age, he sensed the invisible boundaries of palace life. A simple conversation with a sibling could be overheard. An innocent prank could be dissected by advisors. Every interaction was a lesson in diplomacy before he even knew the word. And yet, amid this rigid structure, there was warmth. There were moments of joy, the Christmas mornings, the private walks in the gardens, the occasional quiet laughter shared with siblings. But these moments were fleeting. The palace demanded a performance at all times, and performance, as we'll see, can conceal more than it reveals. William's relationship with his father, Charles, was complex. Publicly, Charles was the image of regality, calm, composed, dutiful. Privately, their interactions carried subtle pressures. Charles, acutely aware of the weight of history, imparted lessons of duty and expectation, often leaving little room for ordinary father-son banter. William learned quickly that a misstep could be amplified, scrutinized, or remembered indefinitely. And yet, there was love, hidden behind layers of protocol and restraint. A pat on the back, a rare smile during a quiet moment. These were the currency of connection in a palace built on appearances. The corridors of Buckingham Palace have witnessed more than royal ceremonies. They have seen tension, whispered conflicts, secret alliances, and, perhaps most importantly, the silent shaping of identity. Every palace staff member, from the footmen to the private secretaries, understood that the young prince's life was more than upbringing. It was performance. Courtiers learned early how to manage the delicate balance between guidance and control, often knowing far more than they revealed to William himself. The palace was a school in secrecy, and he was both student and subject. Yet, even in such an environment, children are perceptive. William noticed inconsistencies, glimpses of behavior that didn't add up. Subtle exchanges between adults, lingering looks, hushed phone calls. He may not have understood them at the time, but seeds of awareness were planted. And for a boy raised in a palace, curiosity is both a gift and a risk. Asking too many questions can lead to silence, evasion, or reprimand. But not asking can leave a lifetime of unanswered doubts. And, as we know now, some doubts were far more significant than anyone could have imagined. Imagine, for a moment, what it would feel like to grow up in such a gilded cage, to know that every word and action is part of a performance, yet not know that part of your life, the most intimate part, your very parentage, might be a carefully guarded secret. For William, every royal outing, every handshake, every photo was a brushstroke in a public painting. He learned the choreography of royal life long before he could understand the complexities that would later define his personal struggles. Education, too, was exceptional, yet highly structured. Tutors arrived with schedules so rigid they could rival military precision. Lessons in history, politics, languages, and etiquette were paired with subtle lessons in diplomacy and public perception. Every achievement was celebrated, but every mistake was catalogued. The stakes were immense, and the pressure was invisible yet omnipresent. William excelled academically and socially, but he always carried a quiet weight. There was an unspoken understanding. Perfection was expected, and identity was tied to public perception. Even playtime was a performance. Games with siblings were carefully moderated. Courtiers observed interactions, noting character traits that could serve or hinder the monarchy in the future. William learned early how to navigate alliances, negotiate social dynamics, and present a facade of composure. At the same time, he was learning the subtle art of perception, how one gesture, one expression, could communicate volumes without a word being spoken. These lessons, though unspoken, would shape his understanding of human behavior for the rest of his life. Yet, amid all the structure, there were moments of raw humanity. William's relationships with his siblings, especially Harry, were a mixture of camaraderie, competition, and shared experience. The two boys understood each other in ways others could not. They understood the pressures, the scrutiny, the impossible expectations. And in their relationship, we see the early seeds of emotional resilience, humor, and rebellion, qualities that would later serve William in ways few could have predicted. But here's the twist that few people outside the palace walls could have known. While William navigated this world, the foundation upon which his life was built, the certainty of his parentage, was quietly under question. The very identity that had shaped his education, his upbringing, and his sense of self was potentially false. And no one, not William, not the staff, not even some members of his immediate family, knew the full truth. This raises a chilling question. How do you grow into adulthood, when the most intimate aspect of your identity is hidden from you? How do you reconcile love, loyalty, and duty with the nagging sense that some truths are being withheld? For William, the answers were unknowable at the time. He performed, he excelled, he adhered to expectations. But underneath, questions lingered. Doubts, small at first, began to grow in the quiet corners of his mind. The palace, magnificent and historic, was a double-edged sword. It offered security, privilege, and influence. It provided access to the highest echelons of power. But it also demanded obedience, silence, and a willingness to accept that some truths would remain forever hidden. For William, this dichotomy was a lesson in resilience and in restraint. It taught him the delicate balance between public duty and private curiosity, between loyalty and self-preservation. And now, decades later, the walls of that same palace would bear witness to a revelation so staggering that it would change not just William's life, but the very fabric of the monarchy. A lie that had been carefully concealed for generations was about to surface. And the boy who once learned the rules of the palace would now face a decision that no amount of upbringing could have prepared him for. The palace that raised a king was also the palace that hid a truth. And when that truth finally came to light, it would force William to confront everything he had known and everything he had been taught to believe. Every corridor, every room, every ritual that once seemed comforting now carried a weight of betrayal. The world would soon learn that the life of Prince William, groomed for kingship and adored by millions, had been built on a foundation far more fragile than anyone could have imagined. But what came next would not just change William's understanding of himself. It would send shockwaves through the palace, through the royal family, and through the world. A secret kept for decades was on the verge of exposure. And when it did, the consequences would be unimaginable. What would you do if you suspected a secret so explosive it could unravel the foundation of your family? What if the truth was hidden in plain sight, whispered only in corridors and behind closed doors? For Princess Anne, the unspoken guardian of family integrity, this was no hypothetical. It was a reality she couldn't ignore. While the world saw her as dutiful, disciplined, and fiercely loyal, behind the scenes she had a plan. One that would involve secrecy, strategy, and a level of audacity most could never imagine, and has always been known for her intelligence and her meticulous nature. Often called the hardest-working royal, she has navigated the labyrinth of palace life with precision and poise. But this mission was unlike any state duty or ceremonial engagement. This was personal. This was private. It was about uncovering a truth that, if revealed, could change everything. The decision to commission a DNA test was not made lightly, and weighed every possible outcome, every potential scandal, every ripple effect. Could William handle the revelation? How would Charles react? And what about the monarchy at large? The stakes were astronomical. But Anne's instincts told her that the time for curiosity was over. She had to know. Imagine the logistics of such a secret mission. The palace is not just a home. It's a fortress of tradition, etiquette, and rigid protocol. Conducting a DNA test on a member of the royal family without raising suspicion requires planning that verges on espionage. Courtiers, aides, security personnel, every detail had to be calculated. Nothing could be left to chance. One slip, one misstep, and the secret would be exposed, potentially creating a scandal far beyond any family drama. And moved with the precision of a general, she enlisted trusted advisors, those she knew could maintain absolute discretion. The collection of DNA had to be flawless, untraceable, and undetectable. Every courier, every document, every communication was executed with the utmost secrecy. There were meetings in private rooms, silent exchanges in empty corridors, and a level of trust so deep that only a handful of people even knew a test was underway. But this was more than logistics. It was emotional. Imagine carrying the weight of knowledge before anyone else knows, and understood that revealing a secret like this could destabilize the family. But the alternative, living with uncertainty, was unbearable. Every decision she made was calculated to protect William, to protect the monarchy, yet also to uncover the truth. And in her mind, the truth was worth the risk. Now, consider the psychological tension at play. And had to navigate her relationship with William, her brother Charles, and the broader family network, all while orchestrating a mission cloaked in secrecy. It was a delicate dance. How do you confront a lie without shattering trust? How do you balance loyalty with the moral imperative to know the truth? These are questions few can answer, yet, and face them with steely resolve. The DNA test itself was groundbreaking. Conducted with the utmost scientific rigor, the sample collection, analysis, and verification took place away from prying eyes. Laboratories, experts, protocols, all were carefully selected to prevent leaks. The results would either confirm the official narrative or expose a truth that could topple decades of assumed reality. And knew that the implications were far-reaching, not just for William, but for the monarchy itself, for the public's perception, and for the history books. As the results came back and faced a moral and emotional dilemma, the evidence was undeniable, yet delivering it required tact, timing, and courage. Who would hear first? How would William react? And most importantly, when would the world learn? The weight of the decision pressed down on her. One wrong move, and the palace could face a scandal the likes of which had never been seen in modern history. Anne's choice was strategic. She decided that William must learn the truth in private, away from the glare of cameras and the whispers of courtiers. It was a gesture of protection, yet also a recognition of the profound impact such a revelation would have on his life. The moment was tense. William, always composed, suddenly faced a truth that could redefine his identity. And Anne, standing as both sister and guardian, prepared to guide him through what no one else could. But the palace had other dynamics at play. Advisors loyal to Charles, staff who had long navigated the secrets of royalty, and media channels always on the hunt for stories. They were all factors that Anne had to consider. The DNA evidence was explosive, but timing was everything. Releasing it too soon could incite chaos. Waiting too long could mean complicity in a lie. And strategy had to account for all eventualities, anticipating reactions from everyone involved. Imagine the emotional toll on William. He had grown up with admiration for the monarchy, pride in his lineage, and a sense of duty that defined his every move. Suddenly, the foundation of that identity was in question. How does one reconcile love for a father and respect for an institution with the revelation that a core belief, your very parentage, might be false? It is a question that cuts to the heart of human experience. Anne's mission was more than a test of science. It was a test of trust, of familial bonds, and of moral courage. She had to navigate the line between duty to the monarchy and duty to the truth. Every decision, every word, every gesture carried weight. And as the palace walls silently observed, a drama unlike any other in modern history was unfolding, one that would leave no corner of royal life untouched. The shocking truth was now in motion, and had set the stage for William to confront a revelation that would challenge everything he had known. The palace, once a sanctuary of routine and tradition, was now a crucible of secrecy, tension, and impending upheaval. And in the quiet corners of Buckingham Palace, the actors of this drama, William, Anne, Charles, and the unseen advisors, waited for the moment when the private would collide with the inevitable public exposure. But what came next would shock not just William, but the entire royal family, and no one could have anticipated the chain reaction it would trigger. What happens when a truth you've never suspected is suddenly placed in front of you, undeniable and unavoidable? For Prince William, that moment arrived in the form of a DNA report, a piece of paper, sterile and official, carrying information that would upend everything he had ever believed about himself, his family, and the monarchy. Imagine sitting quietly in a room, knowing that the life you've been living, your duties, your responsibilities, your public image, might be founded on a lie. Imagine the emotional turbulence, the disbelief, the questions that suddenly flood your mind. How could this be? Who knew? Why was I never told? And most chillingly, what does this mean for everything I thought I was? The DNA evidence was commissioned, according to insiders, by Princess Anne. She understood the monumental implications of uncovering such a truth. The test itself had been conducted with absolute discretion, analyzed by experts trained to handle sensitive material, and verified multiple times to ensure there was no room for error. In the world of science, the results were indisputable, but in the world of royalty, they were catastrophic. Imagine the scene when William first received the results. He was alone, or nearly so, in a private apartment of the palace, the kind of space rarely seen by anyone outside the immediate family. The document was carefully sealed, delivered by trusted aides who had been sworn to secrecy. He opened it slowly, every second stretching longer than any hour he had experienced in public life. And then he saw it, the confirmation that he was not biologically King Charles's son. At first, disbelief. He read the results again. Twice. 3 times. Surely there had been a mistake? A clerical error? But no. Every scientific marker pointed to the same conclusion. The foundations of his identity, everything he had been taught, and everything he had believed, suddenly shifted beneath him. William's mind must have raced through 1,000 questions. How does one reconcile love and respect for a parent with the knowledge that biology tells a different story? Was Charles aware of this secret? Had the entire palace been complicit in maintaining the illusion? And if so, why? These were not just emotional questions. They were existential ones, striking at the core of who he was. Consider the irony. William, groomed from birth to embody the continuity of the monarchy, to serve as a stabilizing figure in a sometimes chaotic institution, now faced a truth that threatened the very continuity he represented. The public had always admired him as the dutiful son, the future king, the embodiment of stability and decorum. But behind closed doors, the narrative that defined his public image was unraveling. The palace, despite its grandeur, suddenly felt constrictive, almost suffocating. The hallways that once carried laughter now seemed to echo with secrets. The portraits of ancestors lining the walls, symbols of legacy and legitimacy, suddenly carried a new weight, of questions that had never been asked and answers that had been hidden. Every ceremonial event he had attended, every smile for the cameras, every handshake and bow, could they now be seen in a different light? But it wasn't just the personal shock. The implications for the monarchy were staggering. Succession laws, tradition, and the public's perception of the royal family were all tied to lineage. To discover that the presumptive heir was not biologically related to the reigning monarch could, in theory, destabilize centuries of protocol and expectation. Advisors, courtiers, and family members would have to weigh every word, every decision, every public statement with extreme caution. And in that moment, William became acutely aware that his next moves would reverberate far beyond the palace walls. Think of the emotional conflict. On one hand, there is love for a father, respect for a family, loyalty to an institution that has shaped life since birth. On the other hand, there is the undeniable knowledge of a personal truth, one that contradicts everything previously believed. How does one navigate such a paradox? The psychology of it is staggering. Some might feel rage, others betrayal, others profound sadness. For William, every emotion collided simultaneously, creating a storm that few could ever comprehend. Now, picture the secrecy involved, and, aware of the sensitivity, had ensured that the test results were kept under strict lock and key. Only William and a very small circle of confidants knew. There were no leaks, no whispers in the press, no rumors circulating, yet. The palace was a pressure cooker, tension building as William grappled with the reality that his life, his identity, and his role had been framed within a narrative that wasn't entirely his own. And here is where human nature complicates the equation. How do you act on knowledge that could change the course of a nation while protecting those you love? William had to consider the timing of any action, the sequence of disclosure, the impact on his mother, his siblings, and the wider public. Every step was fraught with potential consequences, and yet indecision could be just as dangerous as disclosure. Even more, imagine the private psychological toll. Being raised under constant scrutiny is one thing. Discovering that an essential fact about your parentage was hidden from you is quite another. It challenges trust, redefines relationships, and forces a confrontation with questions that have no easy answers. What does family really mean? Is lineage everything, or is love enough? And can one separate personal truth from public expectation? But William did more than question. He acted. The first instinct was private. No dramatic public statements, no confrontational meetings, no immediate decisions broadcast to the world. He had to process, to understand, to reconcile. The palace, with all its beauty and history, had suddenly become a place of tension, secrecy, and profound emotional upheaval. Every advisor, every staff member, Every family member involved in this circle of knowledge was acutely aware of the stakes. The shocking reality also posed a political and public relations dilemma. Buckingham Palace had long cultivated an image of continuity, stability, and legitimacy. Suddenly, this image was threatened, not by scandalous behavior or misconduct, but by something far more fundamental, the very genetic truth of its heir. How could the palace manage public perception once the truth inevitably came out? How could the institution survive a revelation that challenged the most basic assumptions of monarchy? William, poised for leadership and accustomed to navigating delicate situations, now faced the ultimate test. The DNA evidence wasn't just a personal revelation. It was a pivot point. Every decision from here on out would carry enormous weight. And yet, despite the enormity, William approached it with quiet determination. He understood the stakes. He understood the consequences. And he began the process of charting a new path, one that would soon lead to the most dramatic step of his life, saying goodbye to Buckingham Palace. Even now, consider the paradox. The palace that trained him, that protected him, that defined him, was also the palace that concealed a lie at the very core of his identity. William had grown into a man capable of extraordinary composure, yet nothing could prepare him for the emotional weight of the revelation. And as the palace waited, the corridors quiet with anticipation, a new chapter was poised to begin. But what came next would not only redefine William's personal identity, it would send shockwaves through the monarchy, alter alliances within the royal family, and challenge everything the public believed about the line of succession. The consequences of this DNA revelation were only beginning to unfold, and no one, not even William, could predict the full scale of what was about to happen. Imagine dedicating your entire life to a purpose, only to discover that the foundation upon which everything was built is a lie. For Prince William, the revelation from the DNA test was not just a shocking scientific fact. It was a seismic emotional event. Every handshake, every speech, every ceremony he had participated in now carried an invisible weight. Every lesson, every expectation, every ounce of effort to honor the monarchy was suddenly reframed. What does it mean to live under a lie for decades? And more importantly, how do you reconcile loyalty with betrayal, love with disbelief? From the moment William learned the truth, a profound psychological struggle began. Childhood memories, once comforting, once affirming, took on a new and complicated meaning. The Christmas mornings with family, the quiet moments in the palace gardens, the celebrations and traditions, all were now tinged with uncertainty. Who was he really? And who had known the truth all along? The palace, with its golden halls and historical gravitas, suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage set for deception. Growing up as the heir to the throne is no ordinary childhood. There's no room for mistakes, no tolerance for missteps, and certainly no escape from the ever-watchful eye of public expectation. William learned early to suppress doubt, to channel emotions into composure, and to present a polished image of confidence and certainty. But when the lie about his parentage was revealed, all of that training collided with raw, unfiltered emotion. The man who had been taught to be infallible suddenly felt vulnerable in ways he had never experienced. Every public appearance became an exercise in careful navigation. He had to maintain composure, uphold the dignity of the monarchy, and yet internally grapple with a truth that challenged his very identity. How do you smile for the cameras, deliver speeches about duty, and attend state functions knowing that a lie has shaped your life since birth? The irony was bitter. William's entire persona, the carefully cultivated image admired by millions around the world, was now layered over a profound personal betrayal. Even private moments with family became fraught with tension. Imagine sitting across from Charles, Kate, or Harry, knowing that one revelation changes the nature of every conversation. What do you say? How do you act? Do you confront? Do you remain silent? Do you pretend, even as your understanding of reality has shifted so dramatically? These were questions William faced daily, and each answer carried consequences that could ripple through the royal family for generations. The emotional spikes were relentless. One moment, he might feel shock and disbelief. The next, anger or betrayal. At times, sadness would overwhelm him, a deep mourning for the life he had assumed he knew. There were moments of questioning his own identity, wondering who he truly was beyond the palace walls, the crowns, the public adoration. It's a psychological labyrinth, a storm of emotion compounded by the weight of responsibility. And yet, William was not powerless. Despite the emotional turmoil, he began to chart a path forward. Living under a lie doesn't mean surrender. It means adaptation, strategy, and resilience. William knew he couldn't undo the past. He couldn't change the truth that had been kept from him. What he could do was decide how to respond, how to reclaim agency in a life that had been dictated by expectation, secrecy, and duty. But the palace, with all its historical weight, made this nearly impossible. Every advisor, every staff member, every family member had a stake in maintaining appearances. Courtiers who had long managed the family's public image now had to navigate a reality in which the heir's identity was suddenly uncertain. Staff whispered in corners, speculation ran rampant, and yet the world outside had no idea. William had to operate in a realm where truth, perception, and secrecy collided in every interaction. And this is where the contradictions became unbearable. The man the world saw, poised, confident, unwavering, was now privately wrestling with questions no one else could answer. How do you honor a father when your very connection to him is questioned? How do you uphold an institution when its integrity depends on public belief? How do you maintain relationships with those who may have known the truth all along, yet remained silent? The emotional tension was unbearable, yet it demanded composure. In moments of solitude, William reflected on his childhood. He remembered lessons in duty and honor, the weight of expectations, and the intricate choreography of public appearances. Each lesson, each memory, now had a hidden layer of complexity. Was his loyalty to the crown based on principle, or had it been shaped by a narrative that wasn't entirely true? These were questions with no simple answers. Every reflection carried a mixture of grief, anger, and the need for understanding. The psychological burden extended beyond the personal. It touched every aspect of his life. Decisions about public appearances, charitable endeavors, and family interactions were now filtered through the lens of uncertainty. Every smile, every handshake, every speech was an exercise in balancing truth and perception. And the irony was inescapable. The very training and discipline that had prepared him to lead the monarchy now became tools for managing the fallout of the revelation. Yet, amid this storm, William found moments of clarity. The lie that had shadowed his life was not an end, it was a beginning. It forced him to confront questions he had never considered. What does it mean to be a son? To be a brother? To be a public figure? To carry responsibility for an institution that may not be entirely grounded in the truth? Each question demanded introspection, courage, and a willingness to act decisively, even when the consequences were unknown. And act he did. William began to quietly reassess his role, both within the palace and within the monarchy itself. He understood that living under a lie indefinitely was impossible, not just for him, but for the institution he was destined to lead. The decision to step back from public duties was not impulsive, it was deliberate. It was a recognition that truth, once revealed, cannot be ignored, and that integrity, even in the face of personal pain, must guide action. The tension within the palace intensified. Advisors speculated, courtiers whispered, and yet William maintained a calm exterior. It was the hallmark of a lifetime spent mastering the art of composure. Yet internally, the emotional stakes could not have been higher. Every move, every statement, every private meeting was now loaded with significance. One misstep could escalate into a full-blown scandal, yet inaction was equally dangerous. As William navigated this complex reality, he also had to consider the implications for the next generation. How would his children perceive the monarchy if they knew their father had grown up under a lie? What legacy would he leave behind if the foundations of succession were suddenly called into question? These were considerations that extended beyond personal emotion into the very future of the royal family, shaping decisions that would have historical consequences. Yet, amid all the uncertainty, there was resolve. William understood that living under a lie was no longer sustainable. The palace, once a place of structure and predictability, had become a crucible of truth, morality, and consequence. The revelation demanded a response, not just for himself, but for the integrity of the monarchy and for the millions who believed in its continuity. And so, the stage was set. William would confront the reality of the lie, not with impulsive action, but with strategic consideration, personal courage, and a recognition that some truths must be faced, no matter the cost. The palace walls had witnessed decades of protocol, tradition, and duty, but now they would witness a decision that would shock the world, redefine public perception, and forever change the trajectory of the monarchy. But what came next would not only alter William's life. It would send tremors through Buckingham Palace, create unprecedented tension within the royal family, and force the world to question everything it thought it knew about the heir to the throne. How do you respond when the truth that everyone assumed to be private suddenly threatens to explode into the open? When a secret so deeply buried finally surfaces, the first reactions are always the most revealing. For the royal family, the revelation that Prince William was not biologically King Charles's son sent shockwaves through every corner of Buckingham Palace. Some were stunned into silence. Others reacted with disbelief. And a few, quietly calculating, began to consider the implications for themselves. The inner circle of the royal family is a complex web of alliances, loyalties, and unspoken rules. Charles, king-in-waiting at the time, faced a crisis unlike any other in his decades-long reign. His life, built around public duty and private pride, had always relied on a carefully constructed narrative of continuity. And suddenly, that narrative was fractured. Imagine the conflict he must have felt. Fatherly love clashing with the indignity of deception, personal hurt mixed with the strategic concern for the monarchy's stability. How do you reconcile being betrayed by nature with the imperative to preserve an institution that relies on perceived legitimacy? Then there was Camilla, ever aware of the optics and the delicate balance of royal power. Privately, she had to navigate the tension between supporting Charles and understanding William's emotional turmoil. Publicly, she remained composed, the picture of poise. But behind closed doors, the family dynamics were shifting, like tectonic plates under the weight of centuries of expectation. Every gesture, every word, every glance carried layers of meaning. Kate Middleton, William's wife, was thrust into the eye of the storm. Her role, traditionally supportive and discreet, suddenly demanded an unprecedented level of emotional management. She had to provide comfort and guidance to William while also navigating her own position within the family and the public eye. Imagine the psychological complexity. Being the anchor for a partner whose identity had been shaken at its core, all while the world watched, speculated, and analyzed every facial expression. Every smile, every calm nod, every casual gesture now had potential interpretations that could either soothe or inflame the situation. Harry, William's younger brother, experienced the revelation differently. Known for his rebellious streak and deep emotional sensitivity, Harry immediately recognized the gravity of the secret. But unlike William, who felt the weight of duty, Harry had the freedom to react impulsively, to confront, question, and challenge. This created a subtle tension between the brothers, one balancing duty and strategy, the other responding with emotion and instinct. The dynamic added layers to an already volatile situation, creating potential alliances, rivalries, and conflicts within the palace walls. The extended family, too, had their reactions. Siblings, cousins, advisors. Each had to reassess relationships, loyalties, and perceptions. For some, the revelation was validation of suspicions they had long harbored. For others, it was a blow to personal understanding, a fracture in relationships they had assumed were immutable. Imagine decades of family history suddenly reframed by a single, incontrovertible truth. Every prior interaction, every shared anecdote, every gesture of affection was now filtered through the lens of uncertainty. The palace staff, often unseen but intimately familiar with the family's routines and secrets, became unexpected observers of tension and emotion. Footmen, secretaries, and aides, who had long been the silent witnesses of history, suddenly found themselves in a delicate position. Knowledge was power, and discretion was currency. Every conversation, every casual remark, every offhand question had the potential to alter the trajectory of events. The staff had to navigate the line between loyalty and curiosity, balancing respect for the family with the reality of what they now knew. Advisors, legal counselors, and private secretaries began assessing the immediate and long-term implications. The monarchy, though resilient, operates within a framework of perception as much as law. How would the public respond if this truth surfaced? How should communications be managed? What were the legal ramifications for titles, succession, and inheritance? Each advisor understood the delicate balance. Act too quickly, and the family risks scandal. Act too slowly, and the truth could leak, causing uncontrollable damage. And then there was the emotional undercurrent, the subtle, human reactions that no protocol could fully manage. Charles may have felt betrayal, but also fear. William, shock and a profound sense of loss, mixed with clarity of purpose. Kate, protective and composed outwardly, but emotionally raw and private. Harry, outrage and concern, yet a readiness to support his brother. Each emotion fed into the other, creating a tension that pulsed through the palace. Imagine living within a house where every room holds unspoken anxieties, where whispers of what could happen tomorrow echo louder than any ceremony or pageantry. But the reactions didn't stop inside Buckingham Palace. Allies and distant relatives were subtly brought into the fold, often discreetly, to manage potential leaks or public speculation. One wrong conversation, one unguarded comment, could trigger headlines that would dominate the global media. The palace's communications team, already well-versed in crisis management, had to prepare contingency plans for every possible scenario. They were balancing the truth with the necessity of maintaining public confidence, all while protecting the emotional well-being of the family. And here's the contradiction that made it even more volatile. The very institution designed to maintain stability was now operating in uncertainty. Advisors, courtiers, and staff, all trained to uphold the monarchy, found themselves navigating moral and ethical dilemmas. Should they prioritize public image or familial truth, loyalty or honesty? The palace had long relied on the careful choreography of tradition. Now, spontaneity and human emotion threatened to disrupt centuries of order. As William processed his own response to the revelation, he also had to gauge the reactions of those around him. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every subtle change in tone carried meaning. Was Charles angry? Hurt? Confused? Was Kate silently strategizing, protective, or simply absorbing the shock herself? Each reaction provided information, clues to how the next moves should be planned, and how the inevitable public announcement might unfold. And in the midst of all this, the palace continued its daily rhythms. Ceremonial duties, public appearances, and official engagements could not simply stop. The world expects the monarchy to operate with continuity and composure, even when everything inside the walls is in chaos. Imagine the surreal juxtaposition. William, internally shaken to his core, delivering public appearances with the same poise he had always demonstrated, while behind closed doors the truth simmered, threatening to explode. It was in this environment that the tension truly became palpable. Every decision carried weight, every statement could ignite speculation, every interaction could alter relationships. The palace, magnificent and historic, had become a pressure cooker of human emotion, institutional protocol, and impending revelation. Allies became strategists, confidants became counselors, and every glance carried unspoken understanding. Yet, amidst all this chaos, William began to see clarity. He realized that living under the lie was no longer sustainable, not just for himself, but for the institution he represented. The royal circle, reacting as they did, understood the stakes, but it was William who had to make the next decisive move. How do you honor a family while asserting personal truth? How do you reconcile duty with identity, loyalty with justice, love with revelation? And just when it seemed the palace might absorb the shock quietly, the first ripple reached beyond its walls. A subtle leak, an offhand comment, a curious glance from a trusted aide. Suddenly, whispers began to travel outside the confines of Buckingham Palace. The story that had been tightly contained for decades was poised to enter public awareness. And when it did, it would challenge not just the family, but the monarchy itself. But what came next would push the palace into uncharted territory, forcing William to make a choice that would redefine his life, his role, and the institution he had been groomed to lead. The royal circle's reactions were only the beginning, and no one could predict the scale of the storm that was about to hit. What would you do if the very life you were raised to lead suddenly felt like a performance built on a lie? For Prince William, the revelation from the DNA test was more than shocking. It was transformative. Every duty, every expectation, every ounce of his carefully cultivated identity now had to be reevaluated. And the choice he faced was monumental. Continue under the shadow of deception, or step away from the very institution that had defined him since birth. Planning an exit from royal duties is not like resigning from a corporate job. There are no HR departments, no standard protocols, no handbook to guide you through decades of public expectation, centuries of tradition, and the gaze of a global audience. The stakes are astronomical. One wrong step could shatter the monarchy's public image, alienate family members, and ignite worldwide speculation. William had to consider every detail, every potential consequence, every ripple effect of his actions. The first challenge was strategy. How do you leave without creating chaos? How do you protect the monarchy while asserting your own truth? William needed a plan that balanced discretion with decisiveness, emotional honesty with public responsibility. Every move had to be deliberate. Every interaction with family, advisors, and staff needed careful orchestration. This was not impulsive rebellion. It was a calculated, courageous step into the unknown. Imagine the conversations behind closed doors. William and a handful of trusted advisors huddled in private rooms, weighing options and potential outcomes. Should he announce his withdrawal publicly? Should the reason be stated outright, or framed in careful language to preserve family dignity? How would the media respond? How would the public react? Every question was a puzzle, every answer carried weight. And all of it had to be done while maintaining composure in a world that expects perfection. There was also the emotional dimension. William had grown up immersed in palace life, groomed for a role that now seemed uncertain. Stepping away was not merely a professional decision. It was deeply personal. It meant redefining his identity, separating himself from the legacy he had once embodied, and facing the judgment of a public that had admired him as the future king. The psychological burden was immense. How do you leave behind a life that shaped your every thought and action? How do you honor tradition while seeking authenticity? The palace itself complicated matters. Buckingham Palace is more than a home. It is a living institution. Courtiers, advisors, and staff all had roles to play in preserving the family's image and operational stability. Planning an exit meant coordinating with these stakeholders without signaling alarm. Misdirected communication could spark rumors, leaks, or scandal. The palace, often viewed as a symbol of control, was paradoxically fragile. Every decision William made had to consider its impact on the people who made the monarchy function. William's planning also extended to public perception. The monarchy is an institution that relies as much on image as it does on law or tradition. A departure framed incorrectly could erode trust, invite ridicule, or destabilize confidence in the succession. William knew he needed a narrative, one that explained his choice in a way that maintained dignity, honor, and credibility. He had to prepare statements, anticipate questions, and ensure that every message aligned with the broader strategy for the family and the institution. Private considerations were equally pressing. William had to think about his family, Kate, his children, and even extended relatives. How would his decision affect them emotionally and socially? How would it influence their perception of the monarchy? Could they be shielded from the fallout, or were they inevitably entwined in the consequences? The complexity of these questions was staggering. Each answer shaped the next step in a process that could not be reversed. There was also the matter of timing. Leaving the palace could not happen abruptly without raising suspicion or causing chaos. William had to carefully orchestrate his departure, choosing the right moment, the right audience, and the right context. Even the smallest miscalculation could spark media frenzy, family discord, or political tension. Timing, he knew, would be everything. Consider the logistics. William had to coordinate the practical aspects of stepping back from royal duties: relocation, staff adjustments, public appearances, and ongoing responsibilities. Buckingham Palace functions as a meticulously organized ecosystem. Removing a key figure, the heir apparent, required delicate adjustments. Advisors, staff, and family members had to be aligned in secrecy to ensure a smooth transition. Every detail, no matter how small, mattered. And then there was the emotional preparation. William needed to prepare himself for the public response, for the inevitable media scrutiny, and for the questions he would face from the world. He had to anticipate criticism, disbelief, and judgment while maintaining poise. The mental fortitude required was extraordinary. Imagine stepping onto a global stage, not to celebrate, but to reveal a personal truth that could reshape history. The weight of expectation, emotion, and consequence pressed down like nothing he had ever experienced. The strategic complexity extended to legal considerations as well. Titles, privileges, and succession are governed by law, tradition, and precedent. Exiting from royal duties without legal missteps required careful consultation with palace lawyers and constitutional advisors. Every word, every clause, every procedure needed scrutiny to avoid unintended consequences. One misstep could invite challenges from within the family, from Parliament, or even from international observers. As William navigated these layers of strategy, secrecy, and personal reflection, he began to crystallize his decision. It was not a retreat born of fear, nor a rebellion born of anger. It was a conscious, deliberate choice to reclaim agency over his life, to align his public role with personal truth, and to confront a reality that had long been concealed. Every step, every conversation, every plan was part of a carefully constructed path forward. Yet even with meticulous planning, there was uncertainty. Human emotions are unpredictable. Reactions from family members, staff, or the public could derail even the most detailed plan. The palace, steeped in centuries of protocol, now faced a scenario it had never encountered. William's choice was unprecedented, challenging norms, expectations, and historical precedent. The tension was immense, and the stakes could not have been higher. Finally, there was the emotional paradox. Stepping away was simultaneously liberating and painful. William was leaving behind a life he had been trained to inhabit, a life defined by duty, tradition, and expectation. Yet he was stepping into authenticity, reclaiming control over his identity, and facing the future on his own terms. The balance between loss and empowerment was delicate, and every decision carried emotional weight. And just when it seemed the exit plan was secure, a new variable emerged. Media speculation, palace intrigue, and the inevitable curiosity of royal insiders threatened to accelerate the timeline. The careful choreography William had designed now faced external pressure. One unguarded comment, one slip in conversation, could unravel months of planning. The palace had become a stage of suspense, and William was both actor and strategist in a drama that the world had yet to witness. But what came next would take the planning from private deliberation to public reality, forcing William to act decisively in a way that would shock the royal family and the world, and change the course of his life forever. How do you prepare for a world that will eventually know a secret you've been guarding for decades? For Prince William, stepping away from royal duties wasn't just a private decision. It was a strategic maneuver in a game played on a global stage. The palace may have been a fortress of protocol, but the outside world, the press, the public, the relentless scrutiny of social media, waits for nothing. Even the slightest slip could ignite speculation that would spread like wildfire. The first signs came subtly. A carefully chosen glance in a televised appearance. A handshake held a moment too long. A slight hesitation in a speech. Nothing overt, nothing official, but enough to make the observant viewer pause, to sense that something was shifting beneath the surface. The world began to notice anomalies, tiny cracks in the facade that had always seemed so flawless. It's astonishing how much the public can read into these small cues. Analysts, commentators, and armchair experts dissected every frame of footage, every photograph, every public appearance. They spoke of tension, of fatigue, of subtle changes in demeanor. And yet, none could know the private storm brewing inside the palace walls. How could they? The truth was a secret held by only a few, and its implications were beyond imagination. Kate Middleton, standing beside William, played a critical role in this delicate dance. She maintained the composed, supportive image expected of a royal spouse, but insiders suggest that behind the calm exterior, her mind was racing. Each gesture, Each facial expression, each public smile was a calculated effort to manage not only the optics for the world, but also William's own emotional state. Imagine the pressure of performing perfection while carrying the weight of a secret that could topple centuries of public trust. Meanwhile, the media began to pick up on whispers, subtle hints that something was amiss. Leaks, carefully planted by palace insiders or misinterpreted by journalists, began to circulate. Rumors of tension, of internal disagreements, of a possible shift in William's role spread quietly at first. The palace responded with official statements that were measured, neutral, and seemingly routine. But for those paying close attention, the cracks were visible. William's public appearances became a masterclass in restraint. Every movement, every word, every smile was calibrated. He had to maintain the dignity of the monarchy while privately processing a revelation that challenged his identity. Imagine the emotional discipline required to address an audience of thousands, or millions on television, while your mind reels with the knowledge that everything you've believed about your family may be false.